Okay, hi friends, and welcome to our continuing work. This is program 20 of the Discipleship in the New Age, volume 1, section 1, part 4. We're moving towards part 5, video commentary. This is the 2nd of August, and we have finished those, well, finished. We have gone through the 10 different modes of communication. Namely, these 10 modes are what we call the 10 seed groups. And also, I think in externalization of the hierarchy, which I have completed as a video commentary. It's an extensive work on that. There are additional things that are said about these 10 groups. I just want to say that all of us, I think, will find our way into one or the other of these groups as we begin to serve. So the last one we dealt with was the creative workers. It's kind of a composite group of 3 members from every one of the foregoing 9, and it has 27 members. Now, if you total the way the new esoteric schools are represented to us in the book Letters on Occult Meditation, the number is the same for the advanced school. 24 students, that is a number of Shambhala, and 3 very experienced esoteric instructors who are not teaching in the conventional sense. So we've done Roman numeral 1, which talks about points through which new energies can reach humanity, and Roman numeral 2, these 10 C groups and modes of communication, and we're now dealing with the Roman numeral number 3. Just a few pages that will take us to section 5, or part 5 anyway. These groups, says the Tibetan, are also an externalization of an inner existing condition. They are an effect and not a cause. I think that's, may I say, very interesting that interiorly the groups exist with a larger number of personnel, and they do attempt to externalize themselves upon the more objective plane, etheric physical, in order to be effective in bringing the plan forward before more members of the human race. Now, you know, I'm basically distinguishing here between what the Tibetan is saying and my comments on it, and I always try to show the difference by saying something like going on with the Tibetan, or the Tibetan states further, etc., etc. And when my comments are made, I say, note this, or may I say, or that kind of thing. Okay, now about these groups going on with the Tibetan, that they themselves may have an initiatory effect as they work out into manifestation upon the physical plane is no doubt true. Well, let me say that participation in these groups will obviously advance spiritually the members who are the constituents of any of these groups. But let me say that's not the major purpose of the groups. So going on with the Tibetan, but they are themselves the product of an interactivity and of a subjective aggregation of forces which must perforce become objective. I'm greatly simplifying the way I note certain sentences in the Tibetan's material. So let me say that the purpose eventually will be to be in touch with the inner groups and to know oneself to be a member of the inner group or groups, and part of the attempt as well to externalize on the etheric physical plane the intent of these inner groups. All of this, let me say, is part of the externalization process. So only the Tibetan is somehow giving us the method by which it occurs. Going on with the Tibetan, the work of the disciples who find their place in these various groups is to keep in close rapport with 10 inner groups, which form, nevertheless, one large active group. Now, let me say that's a very important idea, that there is no hard and fast line of demarcation between these inner groups. They all do potentially help each other, and when viewed from the perspective of the master, form one large inner group. And I think I've commented before on the idea that no matter what group you're in, you can benefit from the processes of the other groups, maybe some more than others. If the inner group has a closer kind of ray configuration or chakric usage that is similar to the group that you're in. So repeating then what DK said, the work of the disciples who find their place in these various groups is to keep in close rapport with 10 inner groups. And as I've said, not necessarily in equal rapport. It depends on the similarity of the inner group to the group that you may find yourself in. But nevertheless, in general, to keep in close rapport with 10 inner groups, which form, excuse me, nevertheless, one large active group. Let me say it's important to consider the wholeness of the 10. And the lower concrete mind, being such as it is, tends to divide things with hard boundaries, which is not really true, nor is it the way the masters see this collection of groups. All right, going on with the Tibetan, this group force will then pour through all the various groups, just insofar as the disciples in the groups do the following things as a group. Well, I guess he's talking about the group force of the aggregate of all 10. And now he's going to give us some requirements to be energized by this aggregation of 10 groups considered as one group. But of course, there's a more specific kind of activation from the group interiorly, which is the same as the group that you are attempting to work within. So there's the whole and there's the particular. And we have to be aware. We have to be aware of both. So what do we have to do? What are the requirements? And now he's going to go on with these, and we'll try to keep note. Number one, keep on rapport with the inner source of power. Now, I suppose that can be either the 10 together with its group force, which obviously altogether is stronger than the force that can be applied by any one of the inner groups. So keep on rapport with the inner source of power. Then number two, never lose sight of the group objective, which again can relate to the inner group, which is the same as the acceptance scope, the same as the outer group that you are attempting to work within, and also all of them taken in the aggregate. So we have to keep in mind that we are members of an externalization process, which is part of the divine plan. I'll just, bring these into bold. All I'm doing is distinguishing a bit between the different kinds of sentences that DK is offering us. Number three, cultivate that dual capacity to apply the laws of the soul to the individual life and the laws of the group to group life. Well, let me say that the laws of the soul are pretty much group laws. We have from esoteric psychology, as the laws of the soul begin to be listed, the law of sacrifice, or of those who choose to die. Then number two, the law of magnetic impulse, or also called the law of polar union. Then we have number three, the law of service that's most interesting, revealing the different modes of service and ideas about service, which often slip away from us. And number four, the um, law of repulse, which begins to be influenced by the spiritual triad and is not simply a law of the soul. Then the law of group progress, which is also called the law of elevation. And then a couple of still greater laws. What is it? Expansive response, number 6, and number 7. Well, you can look it up. I seem to be forgetting. Well, law of the lower 4. That's what it's called. But those laws are so high that we are not likely to be applying them in any meaningful way. So those laws have to be poured through the individual life and through the group life if we want the group force to pour through the members of the individual and any particular group the individual may find himself or herself within. Okay. Now, further, if we want to have this group force pour through, what else is a requirement? How many of these are there? Okay, well, fair number. Yeah. Well, anyway, it takes us up to Roman numeral 4, and then thence to part 5. So I think, we can probably get that far. So what other requirements do we have? Use all the forces which may flow into the group in service. Well, that seems fairly obvious. The group members must learn, says the Tibetan, they must learn, therefore, to register those forces and use them correctly. The hints given below as to the centers which these 10 groups will use must be studied. We're, reading with the Tibetan here. The right use of these centers will take place only when there is a greater group unity established among the members of the individual groups and the groups as a whole. So a requirement here: use all the forces which may flow into the group in service. And one has to wisely consider what kind of service can then be offered as stimulated by the forces which may flow into the group. And especially, I guess, when the forces of all 10 aggregated groups flow in. And DK then goes on and asks us, you ask us, why is this so, my brothers? Because why must we wait for a greater group unity established among the members of the individual groups and among the groups as a whole? Why must we wait for that? If we want to use the chakric power, shall we say, related to the 10 groups in the right way. And then he says, because the force flowing in might prove too strong for the individual disciple to handle alone, but the force is shared by the group if there is a complete group at one-ment. So once again, we have an issue concerning the load, energetic load, force load, which any individual can take upon himself or herself. Let me say that the issue of overstimulation is an ongoing issue, always considered by the masters in relation to their chelas. And certainly it is considered in relation to the science of initiation and to the initiation ceremony. You can be sure that the Christ and Sanat Kumara, for even higher initiations than the initiations of the threshold over which the Christ presides, have the most acute sense of how much energy can be released into the causal body of any candidate for initiation. One can, let us say, imagine the damage that could be done unless this release is really, and here are some scientific terms, scientifically calibrated to the individual who stands to be initiated. Well, let us say that we can leave those matters well in the hands of our superiors who are experts in this. We are the recipients, and we simply trust that that which is coming towards us as stimulation is properly calibrated to what we must achieve. So, okay, so basically we're saying if the group is unified, the force entering it can be wisely distributed. And you can understand how suspicion and self-pity and criticism and all kinds of glamorous and illusory conditions could lead to fragmentation within the group and harm to the individual disciples. So DK goes on here saying, in this way, each disciple can serve the group and his objective eventually becomes what? Okay, let's take a look at that. In other words, what we're saying is that the individual in the group acts as a bearing agent, helping to hold up the increasingly harmonized group so that no one individual in the group is damaged by an excess of force received. And shall we say that maybe that's a good reason why we must avoid the children or the results of the great heresy of separateness in our groups. There are so many ways to be separative, and all of them can have a destructive effect. So we come to this idea that the disciple is, through his willingness to share the burden, that's what's happening, because these incoming energies can be burdensome. By his willingness to share the burden, is helping all of his other group brothers and sisters. So how does the disciple do this? Okay, repeating what the Tibetan said, in this way, each disciple can serve the group, and his objective eventually becomes what? At one moment with his group brothers. That means, of course, that we have to overcome many tendencies towards division. And another method, and let's just say another objective, perhaps, is better put, alignment with his soul and with the inner group, which is the subjective cause of the outer groups. We must, shall we say, not think in terms only of alignment with our own soul, if there really is such a thing. You know, we're told no longer to use the thought, my soul and thine, but in fact, the group soul. But as it is put here, soul alignment and alignment, I would say, with the soul of the inner group, the composite soul. How else to render useful and not harmful the inflowing of force? Point C. The disciple wants to achieve the expression of the particular technique which his group should eventually embody. I think there's quite a bit of training that goes into being an effective member of any of these groups. There are so many things to cultivate, skills, we might say, and so many divisive tendencies to avoid, because they compromise the individual and group effectiveness. Okay, so these are objectives. of the individual working within any one of the externalizing groups: at-one-ment, alignment, and expression of a particular technique associated with a group that he has chosen for externalization, or which has in a way chosen him. Now, the next section is very interesting, I would say. The groups will use the following centers in their work. Notice the head center is always included in all 10. You might say that that's going to be so for the heart center, but it isn't. It's the head center that is the great constant. So group number one is that of the telepathic communicators. The head is the great directing agent, and the superior chakras within the head direct a lesser chakric function throughout the system. But here are the major three centers as we usually consider them. And it is the heart that is filled with the possibility of reaching the intuition. The head may be connected with the atmic center, and the throat with the monastic permanent atom. So the telepathic communicators are kind of the archetype of all of the combinations that we find in the other receptive centers. And on the basis of which centers are being used, we can see some similarities between certain of the groups. So there is an atmic component here, a heart Buddhic component, because what must be communicated must be also communicated from the plane of intuition, and a center of thoughtful articulation that is associated with the throat center. If we were to look at the throat center, we would say it has a connection with the monastic permanent atom. And as I said, this is the group in which so many of the more advanced students around Alice Bailey were incorporated. Foster Bailey, Regina Keller, others who were instrumental in founding the Arcane School. The next group is the trained observers. And of course, they always have the head, because they're working under divine purpose. And here there is much, the heart is connected with the intuition. Okay. And when we're dealing with being a trained observer, it is the intuition under certain circumstances which helps us be rid of the glamorous tendencies and helps us to dispel illusion. Now, the solar plexus center is found here because it connects with the astral plane, where so much of the difficulty can be found, and where a trained observer must learn about glamour and its dissipation. So people in this group, they did have the sixth ray solar plexus representation. What we're going to notice also is that group number 2 has the same chakras as group number 6, and that is revelatory. Now, when it comes to group number 3, we're dealing with the magnetic healers, I believe. Kind of go back here just to make sure. Yeah, magnetic healers. Okay. And they too work with the head and heart, but notice the distinguishing variety in the first 3 groups, because it's always head and heart with the first 3 groups, which are in a way we might say the archetypal groups, but the third center mentioned is throat in one case, solar plexus in another, and ajna in a third. And we get the idea that the ajna center is very important in directing the healing energy in the way it must be directed, given in esoteric healing. A couple of different methods are given, either sort of soul to soul or working on the individual centers. So let's just say we have a first ray and a second ray, plus the normal ajna fifth ray, the solar plexus sixth ray, and the throat the third ray. So it's important, I'll get too loud here. It's important to notice when 2 out of 3 centers are the same, what is the ray indication of the third center? And in the first 3 groups, we have third ray connected with the abstract mind, solar plexus, sixth ray, connected with the plane of glamour, and ajna center, fifth ray, which has a very strong mental component, which allows soul energy to be wisely directed into the individual or group to be healed. Now, notice that in group 4, the educators of the New Age, the heart center disappears. It's not that one must avoid teaching with heart or stimulating the intuition, etc. As a matter of fact, the antakarana particularly is stimulated by the educators of the New Age. They teach the bridging technique. And we might say, when looking at this, we know that eventually the ajna projection is not just the fifth ray, but it becomes Mercury and the fourth ray. And hence can be used in general in the bridging process. Here we can understand the articulation of mental concepts, so that in fact a great deal of academic learning can occur here, along with the bridging into the higher realms. Let's just say these three centers are very useful for antikarana building. It involves visualization, which takes in the ajna center, and it involves theorization, which takes in the throat center. So it's important that this fourth group be intelligent, but be intelligent in a way that employs the higher aspects of the mind and leads to the possibility of bridging into the spiritual triad. There is something about the ajna which represents the spiritual triad, and something about the throat center which enunciates the words of power, which must be used when building the antikarana. I assert the fact, I see the greatest light, purpose itself am I, two merge with one, three minds unite, the highest light controls, and the highest and the lowest meet. Those were the 7 words of power for building the antikarana, and they will be enunciated through the throat center, and the bridge, multicolored, specifically colored, or colored largely with one indigo color for the group work. That bridge must be visualized, and that's where the ajna center comes in. Now here are the political organizers, and again, head and heart appear. The head is there because the question of divine purpose and the plan which represents it must always be in mind. But the heart center tells us something about the true political organizer, the true statesperson, that in fact there is the sense of inclusion and bringing in the greatest good of the greatest number, to which the heart and buddhi makes the individual sensitive. And here, this is very interesting because it's the first time the center at the base of the spine has been mentioned. Now that appears in its full glory at the 5th initiation. But let me just say that the head is the center of purpose, and the base of the spine has been deemed as the center of will. So we can understand that both of them have a very strong first ray component. And if we look at the heart in another mode, we find that the life aspect resides there. And there is an aspect of the heart which is extremely persistent, beating as it does throughout the span of life. And with that persistence seems to carry the first ray mantra, I still persist. So every one of these three centers has this ray of will or purpose connected with it. And as I say, we just are getting to the point where we can organize the kind of work to be done here with political organizers. Up to this time, their influence has not been what it should be. There's so much house cleaning to be done in the political field, just as in the religious field. So he got to the organizing of 1/3 of the group when he had to discontinue. But I think as the seed group project continues for another 175 years or so from now, this being 2021, the proper kind of expression of these chakras will be brought to the fore. And I will also say, we remember him describing group number 5, and he says something like, it is a noble thing to be an agent of the imposition of the will of God. Now, up to this point, we have not had the kind of activation of sufficient chakric inlets of a certain kind to impose. The purpose, the objective of the first three groups has not been to impose the divine will. Now we have that. And there have been a few workers, let us say, unconscious of their occult links, probably, but like Franklin Roosevelt and Churchill and, well, certainly Lincoln as a racial avatar. He also mentions Ataturk, who had a very disinterested use of the Shambhala force. He used it wisely. Now, while he did mention that Stalin and Franco, and I suppose Hitler and well, there are a few others, were disciples of Shambhala, they had not by any means broken into the goodwill use of the will to good. There was still so much of the selfishness in their use of the will. Now here, when we get to the religious workers, is that how he describes it? He tells us it is the head, the heart, and solar plexus, and that, he says, this is necessarily the same as group number 2. I wonder if we think it's quite so necessary. Well, he calls them workers in the field of religion. Okay. Okay, so workers in the field of religion having the head, the heart, and the solar plexus. So much of religion today, every once in a while I catch a TV program about where the churches with their customary worship find themselves. Um, so much of that worship is about astral longing for salvation and to be, what shall I say, a good sheep uh, with the good shepherd, namely the Christ, guaranteeing your salvation. But as stated, the head always guides, and since religion in this solar system and on this planet is to be based on the quality of love and wisdom, the heart is an appropriate choice for the second of the chakras. Note how we're into group 6 already, but 5 of them have had the heart center activated. And then the solar plexus, as I said, because so much of religious approach is astral rather than scientific. And so we have the question of whether we shall give in to the continuation of the 6th ray or begin to develop something closer to the Christ and not as close to Master Jesus, closer to the Christ on the 2nd ray. We know that the religious field is filled with all kinds of glamour, and the very kinds of glamour which the trained observers have to discover and dissipate. Maybe it's not so much for group 6 a question of dissipating the glamour, though that would help. It's more a question of transferring the 6th ray approach to the heart approach, if I can do it, the Jesus approach to the Christ approach. Now, of the various kinds of religions, Christianity particularly has this relationship between the solar plexus and the heart. As far as Islam goes, maybe if you're considering Sufism, that same kind of transference is also possible, but not in the ordinary Islam, which has so much of the 1st ray in it and uses that 1st ray to produce submission to the will, the imagined will of the deity, coming through, so it is said, Muhammad now exclusively. So glamour is a big problem with religion, but if that glamour can be supervised by the heart of love and transferred into the heart of love, then something closer to the New World religion will arise. I would say the New World religion will need the scientific invocatory approach as well. Now, that is pretty well missing from present examples of religion, though at least certain holy days are held, which gives a certain sense of rhythm throughout the year. Anyway, these two groups, 2 and 6, are identical in their use of chakras. And for both, glamour is an issue, and the clarity of the heart in the first instance, group 2, and the love of the heart in group 6, both are necessary to help overcome the glamour. Now, again, we deviate when we look at the scientific servers. And this is the first time that the sacral center has been introduced. And again, the heart center is taken away, that which does not mean there are not scientific servers who have a very strong love nature, and increasingly, as the second petal of the egoic lotus will open for some who originated as lotuses on other planets, but came to Earth, you will see more of the love nature expanding in their use of the technicalities which their fifth ray helps them to engineer. The throat center has already appeared a few times in group number 1, group number 4, and I think now we have group number 7. Now, why the sacral center? Well, it is, interestingly, the home of the mental elemental at first. And obviously, these scientific servers have to use the mind acutely. Matter of fact, their ashrams may be found not so much on the Buddhic plane, but on the highest level of the mental plane, and hence on the lowest level of the spiritual triad. So they are connected with matter and mentality. And eventually that sacral center energy is transferred to the throat. The mental elemental is no longer finding its origin or its major location within the sacral, but within the throat. And the sacral center, however, gives these types of servers the ability to study with exactitude the garment of God, the planetary logos. Now, they may get bewildered and trapped in their study of the garment because they don't have the Buddhic energy, which reveal the one who stands behind the garment. And in the old commentary, that one speaks out and says, know me, the one who stands behind. That all of the interest in the garment is good as long as it does not lead to the forgetting of the one who stands behind. Now, just going back here for a moment, because some good things were said. These servers, they will reveal the essential spirituality of all scientific work, which is motivated by love of humanity. Because, let me say, there is so much scientific work now given to destructive forces and to weaponry and to making the life of human beings far more vulnerable. But if the love of humanity and its welfare are the motive, then the scientific work must be considered essentially spiritual. And we talked about the way in which science and religion have to be related, just as the 6 and 5 are related, and also he advises us relate the 2 and 5. So we study the glory of God through his outer form, and sometimes these servers, maybe not so often right now, but really they become aware of the one who stands behind, the unifying identity who stands behind all of the fascination of the garment. Anyway, there are a number of different destinies for the members of this group and for the group as a whole, and the involvement of etheric vision is required to bring some of these newer projects to the fore, and the changes in the eye, so that the ethers can be seen. And not only do they study the outer garment of God, they arrange for its precipitation, as in the case of reincarnation, where they are intermediary between the impulse from above and the outer appearance of that impulse in form. So they'll be very, very helpful in this matter of reincarnation, understanding it. It's not so easily done, but they will be useful. The head, the throat, and the sacral centers. In some ways, the sacral center is the most material of all the centers. From a certain point of view, there's a crisscross there, and the sacral center has everything to do with bringing out objectification. Maybe the base of the spine center has a lot to do with the etheric nature and with the fires that are located at the base of the spine, many of which are etheric. So that's a little bit in review about the head, throat, and sacral centers of the scientific servers. Now, to say that science has not yet grasped some of these functions and its sacredness is to state the obvious. There are so many scientifically inclined people that are the greatest skeptics concerning the divinity, the spirituality of the form that they are studying so assiduously. But that can be changed and is being changed. And there are certain progressive scientists with a quite abstract mind who begin to see that, yes, this is the case. Now, what about the psychologists? Again, this is interesting because now we begin, I think it's the only other group Am I correct? No, I'm not. But we begin to employ 4 centers and not just 3. So the head and the heart as usual, the solar plexus, where so many people live in their consciousness, in their desire body, and also the throat center. So the psychologists are linked with a number of the other centers, the other groups. They're linked with those groups that employ the solar plexus, but not the throat center, and linked with those groups that employ the throat center, but not the solar plexus. And then he says, this group of disciples will be the first. I guess all I had to do is read on, right? To use 4 centers in their work, and they are, in a curious sense, the mediators of thought between the other groups. They can identify so closely, let me say, with the other groups. They are peculiarly a linking group. And I guess we would have to say they have a lot of the planet Mercury associated with them, because that is the linking planet. And Master DK is known, because of his expansive ability to link many things, as he's known as Mercury. So this group is largely, in some respects, academic in nature, but we can see that the solar plexus part of it links with group number 2 and number 6, and the throat center activation of the psychologists, so that they can articulate the links that they find, links with group number 1 and group number 4 and group number 7. That's quite a bit of linking up. I have found that when we study deeply theosophy and rheology and esoteric astrology and the science of the centers, it's as if we're right in the heart of what the new psychology can mean. Because let me say, this is not just about the psychology of a human being. We're talking about the psychology, the energy equipment of every planet, of every star in the, let's say, 7 solar systems, and of every constellation and so forth. They all have their ray astrological components. And so they all have their own psychology and their own function. And maybe let me say that this group is very good at, I'll put it simply, explaining one group to another. It's so easy to not understand what another individual is really doing in their soul, or what another group is really doing in its soul. But in fact, the psychology group knows this and knows the ideas from which the function of the various groups sprang. So 4 chakras are used here. And then with group 9, the head and heart again, and they are the financiers. And isn't it interesting and maybe predictable that the heart must be used by the financier? It's not just a question of money, it's a question of love and money. So they have, like the telepathic communicators, head, heart, and throat. And they're linked up with other groups that use the throat, but also the sacral centers. Our center links them with materiality, which we at the present time value so highly. But let's just say they are a creative group. So what will they decide to precipitate? To what will they provide the resources which can lead to material precipitation? We can understand that this group has a very strong mental component. Remember the mental elemental in the sacral center as it moves to the throat center. And what it is that, how resources are gathered for precipitation is part of the creative work of this group. So as I was saying earlier when discussing it, it's not just straight finance. In fact, it is related to psychometry also. And the very soul of matter, we might say. Yeah, we reread what the Tibetan says. They're involved with supply and demand and with the great principle of sharing, which ever governs divine purpose and which is, may I say, so necessary if the Christ is to return to visibility in a timely manner. So we might say their sense of values is very important. What is it worth, or what is worth gathering material resources to precipitate? Not everything that can be precipitated should have material resources gathered for that precipitation. But on the other hand, if this type of worker can get into the soul of things, the worker will know what is to be precipitated according to the divine plan. Such a very important group, and it's not only handled by third-rate types, but by seventh-rate types as well. Okay. Whoop. The head, the heart, the throat, the 3 main chakras, and the sacral center, that puts it on rapport with the scientific servers, and the question of what should be precipitated using scientific methods, what should be made visible, what should be made tangible. In other words, let me put it simply, where should the money go? And that's a question for the third ray and the seventh ray. And then finally, the last group to use four of the chakras: the head, the heart, the sacral, and the base of the spine. So the base of the spine will connect it with the political organizers, and the sacral center with the financiers and with the scientists. Head and heart here are standard. This is the great synthetic group. Now, I sometimes wonder, I know that last group has 27 in it, but if we count up the chakras used, well, we'll get some duplication, won't we? We'll get 7 times 3 is 21 plus 8, we'll get 29. But since there is duplication, we're more interested in representing the different groups in terms of a threeness rather than a fourness. So this is the final group involving the will and the heart. In all magical work, the heart is essential, and the sacral center for the sake of precipitation. Interesting that the throat center is left out of it. So the sacral center will connect with group 9 and group number 7, and the center at the base of the spine will connect with group number 5, taking in some of those groups which have the different centers demonstrating. I suppose that when you find yourself working within any one of these groups, and let's remember, first, we should be working in the first 7 in a way, and then add 2 more, and only then finally to consider whether we have a place in the final and the magical group. You can understand how important in the magical process the physically precipitating sacral center and the center of willpower, the base of the spine, would be. And maybe the throat is missing. It's not so necessary to talk about these things. It's rather the action, the doing, the final precipitation. But it is important, I was going to say, when we find ourselves in a particular group, to ask ourselves how we are using the various chakras which are to be utilized in that group. If I were, let's say, most inclined to be a member of the psychological group, I would ask myself, how is the head center functioning, the heart center functioning, the solar plexus center functioning and the throat centers functioning in relation to the duties of that particular group. I find it very intriguing about the group of psychologists and what they have to do, but not necessarily yielding its secret immediately. They are concerned, these psychologists, with the revelation of the fact of the soul and with the new psychology. So interesting that then if that duty is given to France particularly, if they free themselves from the downside of the Leo personality, then members of this group will be found abundantly in France. DK functions so much in this way, but since he is a master, he is found in a number of the different groups, I would say, or helping to stimulate them. And he did make a comment about the fifth ray. And he said, well, I'm not particularly working on this ray in relation to this subject, but if I have a question, I can always go to one of my fifth ray fellow masters or colleagues and be enlightened on the subject. So that interchange between the personnel of the groups is not only open to the masters, but on our own lower level is open to us too. And we don't have to study absolutely everything. We can, in fact, learn by taking advantage of the knowledge and wisdom of the other servers working in a manner parallel to our work. Well, okay. I guess that's the entirety of the chocolate. Did I say chocolate? The chakra groupings. The chakra groupings. Okay. Now moving on a bit here, as it would be my hope to finish this this section. No, and I don't say that I've extracted from these groupings of chakras all that can be understood, but let us at least know, if we're working with a group, how to know the way we are working and which particularly of the duties of the group we are managing to help fulfill, and which particularly of the chakras representing the group we are using in a way that fits with the purpose of the group. Now, DK says here, I wonder, my brothers, if the following sequence of statements will convey anything to your minds. Don't you love it when he has all that confidence in us? It is a statement of fact, and not the least symbolic in its terminology, except that insofar as all words are inadequate symbols of inner truths. So he's going to put us shall we say, to a little test. And it is a sequence. So maybe one statement leads to another. But we have to extract the factuality from these statements. Now, he's just finished listing the chakras. And I don't know how many of us are sensitive enough to feel the chakras at work in our system, the energy centers at work, and to feel their relative dominance or relative weakness, to feel which chakras are used more and which are used less. When it comes to the very first disciple whose instructions were given, he gave the balance of the chakras for that individual, the etheric chakras, and was obviously trying to offer exercises which would bring the chakras more into balance. And maybe we have detected in our own nature certain factors of imbalance. Well, these look like summary statements. Number one, each group has its inner counterpart. Okay, we've reviewed that. And it's a larger counterpart than the outer form of the group. Number two, the inner counterpart is a complete whole, I guess equipped in every way. He goes on to say the outer results are still only partial. In other words, obviously the inner wholeness is not represented by the present state of the outer exemplification. Number three, these 10 inner groups forming one group, and that's really, may I say, an important idea to keep in mind so we don't fragment this process through our usually concrete mental approach. So repeating, he says, these 10 inner groups forming one group are related to the Ashrams of the masters. And are each of them expressive of or governed by 10 laws embodying the controlling factors in group work. Well, you begin to wonder, don't you, whether each one of the groups has its own particular law and that some representation of those 10 can be found in each of the groups. A law is an expression or manifestation of force applied under the power of thought by a thinker or a group of thinkers. Looks like a good definition, doesn't it? So I just kind of want to I guess this is why I stopped this method, because it took so long and there were these great silences, you know. But anyway, a law. a law is an expression or manifestation of force applied under the power of thought, and I would add, under the power of will by a thinker or group of thinkers. There's plenty to ponder on that one. Okay. And let's see if I this is exactly why I abandoned this. No color. And okay. Anyway, well, you can get it. I wanted to get rid of that word work because it didn't belong. Okay, so that requires pondering. A law, to me, is the will of a greater hierarch than I am. I guess we all are hierarchs in our own sense, but if we live and move and have our being in the system of a greater being, and that being wills certain arrangements, that the abidingness of that will expresses itself as a higher law. A law is an expression or manifestation of force applied. From the higher being comes that force. And DK goes on, under the power of thought. So no law, may I say, without thought and without the will to enforce that thought going on with DK by a thinker or group of thinkers. Okay, he's asking, do these mean anything to us? Well, I would say, yeah, they mean something, but not the fullness of what they mean. Point number 4, these, DK says, these 10 inner groups embody 10 types of force, yes, and working synthetically to express 10 laws and an effort to bring in new and different conditions and hence produce a new and better civilization. The Aquarian Age will see consummation. So 10 laws, I'm not sure he's listing them, but if you look, if you look at the 7 systemic laws, law of vibration, law of cohesion, law of disintegration, what is it? Law of the, it has the word for in it, doesn't it? I'm trying to think of it, but anyway, 5, law of fixation, then law of causation and law of sacrifice and death, plus 3 cosmic laws which have been given, the law of synthesis, the law of attraction and repulsion, and what is that third law? Let's take a look here. Yeah, well, here we have them from a treatise on cosmic fire, and I was leaving out the law of economy. Well, maybe when you look at these 10 laws together, 3 of them cosmic and 7 of them systemic, we will find something about the 10 laws that are to be considered. So are these meaning anything to us? These 10 inner groups embody 10 types of force and work synthetically to express 10 laws. And they are an effort to bring in new and different conditions, and hence produce a new and better civilization. The Aquarian Age will see consummation, and it looks like the 10 inner groups with their 10 types of force are instrumental in producing that consummation. All of this, let us say, is most particular, well organized, and directs us to the proper type of participation in the externalization of the new civilization. But while we are being specific about where we belong, we do not forget the factor of synthesis. And then the outer groups are a tentative and experimental effort to see how far humanity is ready for such an endeavor. I would say that hierarchy never really knows until they attempt to see through experimentation. So I'm going to kind of outline these and then go on just a little bit. We will be finishing and going on to group or to number 5. So DK has said, do these mean anything to us? And I just want to review that. Each group has its inner counterpart. I think that means something to us, doesn't it? The inner counterpart is a completed whole, and the outer results are experimental and only partial. The 10 inner groups really form one group, and they're related to the ashrams of the masters. Again, in a way, 7 ashrams, but 3 great groups above that belonging to the Manu, the Bodhisattva, and the Mahachohan. So, and then he goes on to say, each of the groups expresses a certain law, and then the 10 inner groups embody 10 types of force, and we've been, and thus 10 laws, and we've been looking at what might be those laws, and they will help the Aquarian Age come in. And then finally, it's all a big experiment. How far do we really go with this? How far can they go? Is humanity ready? What do you think? Is humanity ready for this kind of experimentation? Now, the next, we just have a couple of paragraphs to go, and we might as well attempt to finish that. Okay, friends, so we've now done, or at least looked at, Roman numeral 3, which has taken us through the various chakras to be used. We have to become ever more sensitive to what chakras are activated. And it may have something to do with our monadic polarization. I know and feel that my monadic polarization is on the third ray, and hence it is the throat center, which is dynamically activated. Tuya, I'm pretty sure, is carrying the second ray monad, and so it's the heart center activated. There are not so many first ray monads, but then above all, the head center would be activated, the first three centers considered. So we've looked at the different chakras, and we've had DK speak about them, and then he's given us a list of points which he wonders, do we understand? And we can test ourselves. Now, we have a little bit more to go before we get to actually part 5. So this is Roman numeral 4, and we've looked at, this is the fourth and last of the Roman numerals in this section. And DK says to us, these groups are also an experiment. May I say how often that word is used. The hierarchy just does not know what humanity will do, and whether humanity can be pushed just a little farther, maybe, but it has to be tested out. And so they have their experiments, and we are perforce part of those experiments. Okay, so he has said and is saying, these groups are also an experiment which has for its objective the manifestation of certain types of energy, which will, when effectively functioning, produce cohesion and at one-ment upon the earth. Now, that's a big statement. And we've seen that they will help to produce a new and better civilization, but this is another very big step. We don't have on our planet yet, a non-sacred planet, anything that we can really call cohesion within the various kingdoms and in relation to each other, and also in within the kingdoms themselves. And this would be, let me say, part of the advance towards the sacredness of our planet, which we can, well, when can we expect that? You know, maybe in the next round, or maybe in the 5th scheme round, which is not the same as the 5th chain round of our 4th chain. So DK goes on, yeah. The present distraught condition in the world, the international cataclysm and apparent impasse, the religious dissatisfaction, the economic and social upheaval, and the appalling effects of war are are all the result of energies that are so potent owing to their immense momentum that they can only be brought into rhythmic activity by the imposition of a stronger and more definitely directed energies. Well, that's really a marvelous statement here. This is the hierarchy looking on at humanity. I guess in the 1930s, when all these things were in fact extant, the second part of the Great War was imminent if humanity would not take the necessary steps, and they did not, and even the disciples did not. I feel I want to read this statement by DK one more time. The present distraught condition in the world. I mean, I really want to know, is it so much different now? Okay. But anyway, going on, the international cataclysm and apparent impasse, may I say it's only apparent because it could be transcended. Going on, the religious dissatisfaction, may I say very present today, and remedied to a certain degree through the awakening of a new type of consciousness going on, the economic and social upheaval that, may I say, is very present today. And going on, the appalling effects of war are all the result of energies that are so potent owing to their immense momentum that they can only be brought into rhythmic activity by the imposition. And let me pause there. We can see how the first ray and the seventh ray work together. First ray imposes, rhythm is the result on the seventh ray, that they can only be brought into rhythmic activity by the imposition of stronger and more definitely directed energies. Hierarchy, may I say, is struggling to bring those energies forward, and maybe especially the political department of hierarchy is struggling to bring them forward and have them attended to. We are not so much in a position to impose, nor should we, but we must be aware when the imposition of the will to good does occur. So our question is, what's trying to come down? Do we receive it? If we do receive it, what do we do with it? How can we use it in service? Maybe, may I say, not so much has changed in the 80 or 90, probably 90 something years since this was written, 80 something, 90 something. The world is still at war, and even if internally that war is raging and not yet, hopefully, precipitated globally on the outer level, it is a war. And it is a war of the energies of the solar angel or angel of the presence of humanity seeking to bring the rebellious human personality in line. Well, you could ask yourself, are we succeeding? We certainly see some more noble people trying very hard to succeed. And we see some, it almost seems, incorrigibly selfish people working for the recrudescence of fascism and direction of humanity by the little personal self, the lower ego. You ask yourself, how can people do that after all we've been through in the Second World War or the Great War from 1914 to 1945? But that's where many people are. And their misunderstanding of things, their glamorous and illusory take on so many factors of life simply has to be corrected. How shall it be so? Well, here's our last paragraph. The groups. See, let me say what DK is emphasizing is not only the particularity of the groups, but their synthesis, their cooperation, their supplementation, their contribution, all of them to each one. That's something I know I have to think more about that. As I scan the way that these seed groups have begun to operate in humanity, I begin to realize that if they do their job, I can benefit from the contribution, from the laws of every one of them. So then I'm beginning to think more synthetically and not just like I belong to this specialized seed group. I think that's a very important message that DK is getting across, the interdependency of these groups. So repeating here, or maybe just going ahead on the end of page 42, the groups are intended to work together eventually, just as the various departments of a great organization work effectively together as a unit. Well, I don't think you could say it more clearly. Or sometimes the image is used, like the fingers on one hand, ideally work together, as I guess should be the case for any good surgeon, and certainly for a pianist. So synthesis is always in mind, or at least unity is always in mind. We have to think in terms of supplementation. What is the group that we, the group we are most identified with, contributing to all the other groups? So going on with the Tibetan, they must function smoothly and intelligently within themselves and also in their relation. Whoa. I think something just happened and not too happy about it, but okay. Anyway, they must function as a unit. They must function smoothly and intelligently within themselves and also in their interrelation with each other. And there's something about that which sums up the whole process as we think about our service. Now, let me say, maybe we're not yet to the point where this is possible, but in years ahead, it will be possible, and we can get a head start on this kind of functioning. So DK, he goes on, this will become possible when the individual members in the groups and the individual groups of disciples lose sight of their own identities in an effort to make this hierarchical work possible. Well, I'm kind of reverting to my old method here, but these seem to be such important statements. So often, isn't it a case of taking our eyes off our little personal self or our little group life and thinking in terms of the larger context? For all of us, there are a number of larger contexts. For the individual, the group is. For the group, the community, the city. For the city, the nation. For the nation, all the nations and humanity as a whole. And we could go on with that. DK, let us say, is predicting the future. And if we want to have a part in that future, we will pay attention to what he's saying. Finally, he says, in this type of group work, this is another one of those, this is another one of those big statements. In this type of group work, the feelings, reactions, wishes, and successes of the individual, even successes of the individual, most emphatically do not count. Only that is regarded of importance, which will further group effort and enrich group consciousness. Well, we can suffer, we can be disappointed, we can be stressed, as so many of us are, I hesitate to say. But if the group benefits, then we're doing our job. And isn't that, a new attitude let's say when we have these days corporate workers, and they're making a lot of money, let's say, some making extraordinary amounts of money. So many of them are in that for the personal accumulation that corporate life will give them, individually, personally, etc. They're not caring so much about the welfare of the greater corporate group, just as long as it will continue to provide them with the money that they would like to bring in individually. Well, isn't this a very different type of attitude? Here we are talking about the will to good. We're talking about the hierarchy. We're talking about Shambhala. We're talking about the welfare of our planet and its function within the solar system and the progress of the solar logos, both in relation to the solar system and in relation to the cosmic logos in which it plays a heart center, and so forth. We're dealing with expansions which will lead to the fulfillment of universal objectives. It's a very different thing, isn't it? I mean, we're not in it for our little selves. We can't say with some of the more narcissistic types, what's in it for me? We cannot say that and maintain our esoteric self-respect. Well, friends, believe it or not, we have reached part 5. And it does go on for 12 pages, so it's not going to be a short presentation. We're roughly, but not quite, halfway through the introduction to volume 1. And I know that many of you have read this, maybe more than once, but I would just like to say, if you're like me, you've read it, but new information, new hints, new wisdom, potential wisdom is always popping up. I'm just amazed at what I have overlooked, even as I read, in my view, carefully, and even written commentaries on this very material. So there's always more to extract and to apply. Okay, so let's see. Well, I thought I would save you a little tedium, but I haven't quite. We finished now, program 19. Wait, program 20. And oh my, here I thought I would save you this, and I didn't. Yeah, this, I got it now. We finished program 20. and extracted a little. And we'll be moving on to program 21, and we'll be beginning on page 43. So this will be Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1, Section 1, Part 5. I'm just using a red letter there, as it's probably clearer than a 1V, video commentary. And I don't yet know what day we'll be able to do this. Maybe sooner than I think. So all of us are wishing you love and many blessings, and real progress, as long as we realize that our individual progress is not the sole reason, or even a reason which counts when it comes to what we're trying to do. So this will be ready. BL will put this on Makara, and Harold and Joe will make sure this is up on our YouTube channel, Moria Federation Esoteric Education, and on we go. The way things are going is probably going to be a series that's got 50 or 60 programs in it. And I hope you can pay attention to the Tibetan's words. They are the most important, but maybe a few associations that I offer you as they come to me will also be light producing. We'll see you soon. Whoops, what happened there? That was something strange. And yeah, there we go. Okay. So bye for now.